Hey guys, it's time for another story. Before we start this one, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates and comment on which manhwas you want to see here. We're in this together, now let's get to the story. The heavens and earth are benevolent to everything. Nonsense, I don't agree with that. The old celestial Tao was the villain and the same celestial Tao is full of slaughter and death. Watch as I straighten the yin and yang, remodel the cycle of reincarnation, and create a perfect world of cultivation. A world where all the rebels will, cough, cough. In short, just watch and learn. And this is the willpower of our protagonist in today's story, a guy who shows remarkable development in his personality and character, with many well-written ups and downs. So let's keep a close eye on how he'll handle the challenges ahead. Let's go. The heavens and earth are benevolent to everything and everyone. Nonsense, I don't agree with that. The old celestial Tao was the villain, and the same celestial Tao is filled with massacres and deaths. Watch me and see how I straightened the yin and yang, recreated the cycle of reincarnation, and created a perfect world of cultivation, one in which all the rebels will, cough, cough. In a few words, just observe and learn. Since the birth of the world at the beginning of chaos, the great Tao has always existed. It was responsible for the laws of heaven and earth and changed everything beneath the celestial Tao. The world underwent two great cycles. During the first cycle, the dawn of history, thousands of people trained and cultivated meticulously, just to reach the realm beyond the celestial Tao, to surpass their limits. However, living beings were greedy, and not only did they selfishly steal the spiritual roots of heaven and earth, they even greedily tried to claim the source of the celestial Tao. The celestial Tao was weakened by the greed of the world and became disappointed with all living beings. Eventually, the celestial Tao destroyed all living beings during the second great cycle. The three worlds, heaven, human, and earth, were divided into regions and no longer the same. The west was controlled by the gods. The east was managed by the immortals. The realm of earth became a private place and quickly turned into a lost land where the piled-up bones became taller than the mountains and the unjust souls were transformed into ghosts. The human realm is somewhere between the powerful heaven realm and the earth realm, where the weak fall into the reincarnation cycle. However, some beings from the first great cycle were not completely annihilated. Some of them reincarnated as humans and are among us to this day. Some simply came back to life, while others were reborn with their powers intact. They all have the same purpose, which is to embark on the path of destiny and challenge the celestial Tao. The celestial Tao awoke still enraged and launched a powerful thunderbolt upon the earth, and for the second time, the world was destroyed. The story begins with the protagonist talking to the system, claiming that the previous celestial Tao left that world behind and departed, asking if he is now the new celestial Tao. The system answers affirmatively. The protagonist tells the system that he just arrived in that world and the system is already giving him so much importance, and says that the system really has high expectations for him, something that could be either positive or negative. The system says that now the protagonist is the celestial Tao that the system has chosen and is the one who possesses unlimited power in this world. While a couple ascends that path, the gentleman encounters the protagonist saying that he is curious and asks why the previous celestial Tao always used force to solve things. Soon, the system responds, asking the protagonist if he doesn't think that force is the best method to solve things. The protagonist says that strength doesn't solve all problems. It only serves to eliminate enemies. He claims that Brother Sun once said that the strong use force against someone weaker, and the weak use force against the even weaker. But the protagonist is not the old celestial Tao and claims he would never make such a low mistake. Since the system is only visible to the protagonist, that man wonders if he is talking to himself. Soon, a fierce dragon appears in the direction of the couple and the protagonist. The man then says it's a fourth-order dragon and warns everyone to flee. This situation was going to be dangerous. The protagonist then thinks about the 7 orders and claims that from that perspective, the dragon actually seems quite weak. Just as the dragon is about to attack, the protagonist raises his pinky finger and launches a powerful laser-like attack that flies past the dragon and hits a distant mountain. Startled, the dragon immediately flees, flying away without hesitation. The protagonist then says that even someone at the reverse celestial king layer wouldn't be able to withstand 3 of his attacks, claiming that the small dragon doesn't have the courage. The system asks the protagonist if he didn't say that the strong use their strength against someone stronger. The protagonist responds that he merely scared the dragon and didn't try to hit it. The system then asks the protagonist if he isn't going to use force against his enemies. The protagonist replies that as long as negotiations are possible, that world won't be destroyed for a third time. But his beloved Chinese blood can't promise anything. Furthermore, the protagonist says he arrived there just an hour ago and still knows almost nothing about the world. He adds that he's not even familiar with the situation of the place and questions how he could be a good celestial Tao. It's hard to believe. Looking from a distance at the gates of the Freedom City, the protagonist says that will be his first stop. At the gates of the Freedom City, two men who are enslaving women talk about how great this hunt was and how they'll surely get good payment for these women. The second man claims that the fairies are always sought after by the nobles of that city. Soon the first man spots the protagonist passing by and asks him if he would be interested in his slaves. He says that for just 10 gold coins, the protagonist can take any slave they have. He then explains to the protagonist that those fairies are the most recently captured, ranging from war prisoners to innocent women from some village. He mentions that there are even some child workers who can be made into maids from an early age. With some sort of X-ray vision, the protagonist notices that the hearts of those women seem completely empty. Still not getting a response from the protagonist, the man tells him that if those women don't please him, he has something very rare with him. This is getting a little strange. He then calls for another cart, lifts the cloth off, and reveals a perfect fairy. He says that this one is from the Elven race, only found in the Western continent, and the protagonist can have her for just 1,000 gold coins. He claims she is definitely worth that price. Still not responding to the man, the protagonist ignores him and continues on his way to the city. Disappointed, the man mutters that the protagonist is just a worthless wanderer. Once inside the city, the protagonist wonders how human trafficking can be happening there. He claims that it's worse than in a feudal society. The system then asks the protagonist why he doesn't free them. It wonders if maybe that isn't in his character. The protagonist then says there's no need to free them. He explains that the slave traders will just keep capturing more people, and that won't solve the problem completely. The protagonist then points to a store and tells the system that there are at least 100 slaves in that shop, and that kind of shop exists on every continent. He asks how many slaves the system thinks he would have to free. The system responds that the protagonist is the celestial Tao, and as long as it is the protagonist's wish, all slaves in the world are free. All slave traders will be killed, and all slave trading businesses in the world will go bankrupt. Finally, something good around here. The protagonist then questions that another market will appear to fill the commercial gap and start another wave of slave hunting. He claims that unlike his predecessor, to solve a problem, they only need to deal with the root cause. The protagonist then enters the store and is welcomed by an attendant. The attendant asks what the protagonist is looking for. The shopkeeper then says that all those slaves are finished products, well trained by their market, and they guarantee that none of them will try to escape. He adds that if any of them do try to run away, they will pay 10 times their worth to the protagonist. The protagonist asks the shopkeeper if, even if one of the slaves escapes, would it still be considered an escape? The shopkeeper laughs, saying the protagonist must be joking. As long as the protagonist buys them, even if he tells them to leave, they still won't leave his side. The protagonist then asks if he can ask the slave some questions. The man agrees and says that if the protagonist isn't satisfied with that slave, he can go to the VIP room where they have others for sale. The protagonist then asks the slave if she desires freedom. She shakes her head, saying no. He asks if she loves someone, causing her to be startled and unable to answer. The protagonist gives a small kick to the glass and asks if she wants to be a free person or remain a slave. A direct question that will have an unexpected answer. She answers, saying that she only wants to be her master's slave. Disappointed with the answer, the protagonist asks the shopkeeper to take him to the VIP room. The shopkeeper says he will prepare the room for the protagonist. Upon arriving in the VIP room, greeted with some tea, a man invites the protagonist to enjoy the place. The shopkeeper then appears, asking the protagonist to wait a bit while he informs someone to bring his exclusive products. The protagonist, smiling, wishes the shopkeeper good luck with his business. Once the shopkeeper closes the door, the protagonist opens the system and asks to start the rules protocol. The system then displays that the abolition of slavery will be the protagonist's first mission as Celestial Tao. The system then asks the protagonist to describe a rule he wishes to add. The protagonist says that the rule is as follows. For any existence of the 5th grade or lower, any act committed against any human or humanoid creature for the purpose of human trafficking will trigger the rule. The human trafficker will become a dark figure whose strength is far superior to the traffickers, and before engaging the human trafficker, they will give a warning. The system, confused, asks why it is set below the 5th level. The protagonist responds, saying that above the 5th level are immortals. He then questions the system, asking if it expects immortals to be involved in human trafficking. He wonders if the system isn't at all ashamed of that, and it should be. Continuing with the rule, the protagonist says that after the first warning fails and before discouraging the idea of trafficking, he will attack until they stop the trafficking and the intention. Preparing the rule, the system asks the protagonist to define what human trafficking is. The protagonist says that through threats or violence, forcing others to become commodities to obtain money and favors in return, and it is limited to humanoid life forms, excluding beasts and magical creatures. However, he claims that if the slave is a volunteer, just ignore them. The system then shows the protagonist that the rule has been formulated and asks if he wants to implement it. The protagonist chooses yes. After implementing the rule, as the shopkeeper brings the women to the protagonist, he notices something strange happening and feels a certain presence. Then the light brightens up the whole place and the sky. The system then shows the protagonist that the rule is in effect. Pleased, the protagonist notices someone knocking at the door. The shopkeeper opens the door and says that these are the 10 best products he had chosen for the protagonist, an exclusive selection. After looking at the girls and noticing that all of them seem disturbed, the shopkeeper tells the protagonist that the price will be a bit high. But for the protagonist, suddenly, a shadow appears behind the man, startling him. When he looks forward again, the shopkeeper is frightened to see a malicious shadow that, incredibly, has a form. The shopkeeper, lying on the ground in fear, asks the protagonist if he can also see the shadow. Pleased, the protagonist responds that of course he can see it. He then asks the shopkeeper if this is how his trading chamber greets its guests. Frightened, the man says that in no way does it work like this. The protagonist realizes that his rule is already starting to take effect. Things are going his way now. He then picks up his tea and moves toward the shadow. Still scared, the shopkeeper asks the protagonist what he is doing and claims that getting closer to that thing is really dangerous. In a confused sentence, the protagonist says that if he's not there, the only one in danger is the shopkeeper. He points to the wall behind the shopkeeper. As the wall begins to crack quickly, it breaks open with the man seemingly thrown out from within. Falling at the protagonist's feet, the shopkeeper is startled to realize that it's Captain Andre. The protagonist then asks who the man is. Frightened, the shopkeeper says that he's one of the security captains of his chamber, a powerful second-order warrior. He wonders what kind of opponent the captain encountered that left him in such confusion. As the captain lies on the ground, frightened, he realizes that the shadow is identical to him but much stronger. After emerging from the broken wall, the shadow of Captain Andre frightens everyone. He then asks the shopkeeper how he also ended up in this situation, leaving the shopkeeper with no response. Captain Andre then tells the protagonist that it's better for him to leave first or else he won't be able to guarantee his safety. Things are about to get complicated. Calmly, the protagonist responds to the captain, telling him not to worry about it. He claims that there is no one in that world who can kill him. Furious, the captain says he will leave the protagonist to his own devices and charges at the shadow. In a sword fight with the shadow, the captain doesn't stop attacking even for a second, causing damage to the entire ground and frightening the slaves who are present. Seeing that things are getting out of control, the protagonist uses telepathy points at the shadow and tells it to go that way. Following the protagonist's command, the shadow strikes the captain, making him fall once again at the protagonist's feet. The shadow then moves closer to the captain, who, frightened, asks it not to get any closer. The captain closes his eyes, thinking something is about to happen to him. When the captain opens his eyes, he sees the shadow heading toward the slaves and breaking all their chains, freeing them completely. Exhausted, the captain asks what's going on. The protagonist then says that he understands everything, leaving both the shopkeeper and the captain confused. I don't blame them, this is really hard to understand. He then says that the shadows don't want to kill them, they just want to free the slaves. Stammering, the captain understands that this is how things work. In another room, a man tells everyone to stop the shadows as quickly as possible. He says not to let the slaves escape. Seeing his slaves running away, the man orders everyone there to work harder. But soon he's surprised by his own shadow, which punches him away, causing him to fall off the balcony. The man falls next to a fairy, scaring her. Seeing her move away, the man says all of his money is flying away. After getting closer to the man, the fairy senses the protagonist's presence, who then looks back. He asks the fairy to continue on her way and return home. Having completed the task quickly, the protagonist finds King Tian kneeling, claiming that she has finally found him. In a tea house in the city, the protagonist says to King Tian that didn't he tell her not to follow him. She then responds to him saying that this servant's name is King Tian and she swore to follow her master. She asks the protagonist to please allow her to travel with him across the continent. This reminds me a lot of a duo from Game of Thrones. But anyway. Suspicious, the protagonist refuses King's offer. Curious, King Tian, crying, asks why she can't travel with him. She then cries in the protagonist's lap, asking him not to abandon her. King Tian then asks the protagonist if, by chance, she has done something wrong that the protagonist didn't like. She claims that she can change until the protagonist is satisfied. Furious, the protagonist asks King Tian to get up first and says he's not abandoning her. It's just that she's getting too attached to him. And she has a bad personality with an average stability. He adds that the moment someone bothers her, she would simply destroy an entire country, and that would become a huge problem. Stammering King Tian claims that she only wants to be by the protagonist's side. The protagonist says he's embarrassed when he's with King. He asks her if she still wants to stay with him. Ignoring what the protagonist had said, King Tian happily hugs him. The protagonist then says she's only after his body. Pushing King Tian away, the protagonist claims that if he lets her stay with him, sooner or later, she'll invade his room in the middle of the night. The system then appears to the protagonist and disagrees with what he just said. It says that King Tian at most will only rub up against the protagonist. This is a bit strange, by the way. Claiming that the system knows King very well, the protagonist tells her that if she wants, she can follow him. However, she must stay by his side and remain quiet but not kneeling, as that draws too much attention. Very happy, King agrees to the protagonist's terms and thinks that he cares a lot about her. Disappointed, the protagonist claims that he only wanted to abolish slavery, but now there's a slave in front of him. He says that in King's case, calling her a fool is more appropriate. He then tells her to be sure, not all celestial incarnations are women. Of the 5 celestial incarnations, King Tian, Yu Mingxian, and Kang Tian are women, while Hun Dunshan and Huang Tian are men. And all of them are absolutely loyal to the protagonist. With his hand on his face, the protagonist claims that they are all a bunch of problems. Snapping his fingers, the protagonist calls King and asks her what she thinks about people who are against the Celestials. She says that people who oppose the Celestials are insolent and ambitious. During both the first and second great cycles, they were so ambitious that they ended up killing themselves. The protagonist agrees with King Tian and says that at the beginning of the second great cycle, the Force House of the first who didn't die surprisingly, before they reincarnated, stole the spiritual root of their own world. And this action is no different from killing a chicken to take the eggs. Pretty brutal, honestly. King Tian says that this is exactly what the protagonist had said, and that's why the protagonist destroyed them. She adds that gods died and demons perished. All eras were hastened. For all eternity, only the sky is eternal, and he, her master, is the eternal ruler of the 3 worlds. The protagonist says that this is not necessarily true. Although the Tao Celestial was invincible in the first battle, if it were a group battle, he wouldn't stand a chance. He then says that time is passing quickly, and they still have work to do. He calls King to follow him. Looking at the system, the protagonist knows that the addition of the rules is very smooth. It seems his plan has been successful. While observing the system, King Tian says she has a question. She asks why the protagonist chose to use the Black Shadow to abolish slavery instead of simply giving everyone an unlimited fortune and eliminating all oppression and social hierarchy. The protagonist then slaps his forehead and asks if she is stupid. He questions if doing that wouldn't make everyone reject humanity and return to the era of monkeys. He explains that the reason for the existence of the Tao Celestial is to maintain order, and what he is doing now is to correct the distorted and damaged state of injustices, not to disrupt the natural cycle of society. In theory, he was following what he believed to be right. He says that the task of the so-called Tao Celestial is to open the way for people, to be in charge of everything, and to guide everything. He claims that what people can do, he can also do. And what people can't do, he does as well. That is the Tao Celestial. He adds that in a world where light exists, darkness also exists, something extremely undesirable. He asks King if she understood. She responds, claiming that she understood all the words he said. While observing a woman giving some coins to a beggar, the protagonist says that this is a beautiful example. He tells King Tian to pay attention. Then he says that to prevent her from ruining everything, it's better for her to hide. He snaps his fingers, making King Tian completely transparent, scaring her for being in such a state. As the woman donates some coins to the beggar, the man walking behind her takes the opportunity to steal her wallet. Seeing this detail, the protagonist shouts at the woman, advising her to keep an eye on her wallet while being charitable. Realizing that the man was about to rob her, the young woman delivers a blow to his stomach that sends him flying. Seeing that, the protagonist remarks that the young woman has a good leg. In the last stage, the first-rank martial artist Ah Yi thanks the protagonist for the warning. She almost had a Brazilian experience. As they get to know each other, the protagonist tells Ah Yi that she can call him Tian Dao. Thanking the protagonist, she says that if it weren't for him, she would have been in big trouble right now. The protagonist tells her that it was just a trivial matter and advises her to pay more attention to her belongings next time. Thanking the protagonist once again, Ah Yi says that she still has work to do and asks for permission to leave. Quickly, the protagonist asks her to wait. He then says that since Ah Yi is an adventurer, he asks if she can do a job for him right now. Thinking that if he truly wants to learn more about this world, it's better to find an adventurer to talk to. He thinks King Tian is good, but no matter what he says, she agrees. There's not even a warning for it. So the protagonist tosses a bag full of gold coins to Yi and says that he wants to go west, and it's a little boring. He wants to find some people to talk to during the journey. Going without many people to interact with would be a tragedy. Overjoyed by receiving that amount, Yi says that the master is very generous. She says she'll take care of it and will accompany him to the west. Still transparent, King Tian asks if she can talk a little with the protagonist. He tells her to be a good girl and stay hidden. He'll let her out again. Otherwise, she won't stay with him. At the transmission station in the City of Freedom, Yi shouts for the protagonist, claiming that the carriage is ready. She apologizes to the protagonist for the delay in repairing the carriage. Whispering in the protagonist's ear, Yi says that just to be sure, they don't want to attract attention, so they will take the smaller carriage. The protagonist agrees, saying that it's fine, no problem. Yi then tells her friends that she will introduce the young master to the friends coming with her this time. Ahai offers his gratitude to the protagonist and says that he's a friend of Yi. Mary, Yi's friend, also says that it's a pleasure to meet the protagonist. The protagonist says that it's also a pleasure to meet them. He then realizes that one of them is a priestess, one's a martial artist, and the other is a Taoist. He finds the combination strange enough and wonders if this is the Zhanfamu. Then Yi shouts that Zhanfamu is an abbreviation for warrior, mage, and priest. It's a common composition for an MMO team. A classic, by the way. As they continue on their journey in the carriage, the protagonist, Yi, and her two friends are inside, while King Tian sits outside, still invisible. The protagonist then asks Mary if she is a nun from the Church of Light. Mary doesn't answer the protagonist's question, but asks that the God of Light bless the protagonist. The protagonist knows that the second great cycle of the God of Light was only at the peak of the celestial rank, and it didn't even have a chance to battle the Tao Celestial. But soon Mary answers the protagonist's question and says yes. He apologizes for the question, and Mary says it's okay. Noticing that King Tian is upset, the protagonist mentions that the God of Light from the first great cycle seems to have been killed by King Tian. Then the system appears and tells the protagonist that King Tian will probably say that she forgot, but the number of celestial ranks from the first great cycle that were killed by her hands was only 80, not even reaching 100. Aha says that nowadays not many people pay just to talk with others. He questions if the young protagonist doesn't have guards. Calmly, the protagonist responds that the guards wouldn't be as strong as him. His self-esteem was high. Yi tells Ahai that the young protagonist is so strong that he doesn't even need guards to leave the City of Freedom. Ahai agrees and says that the young protagonist's aura is so well contained that it almost disappears completely, and he barely senses any presence. Surprised, the protagonist asks if it's really all of that. Soon, his aura reaches the underworld and touches a young woman who is kneeling with chains. After sensing that aura, she claims that it's her master's aura. As they walk, the protagonist is surprised that he was found because of his aura, and he acknowledges that he's being very careless. Then Ahai yells for everyone to look ahead. Ahai asks Mary who those people are. She replies that they seem to be refugees. While observing Mary's slender posture, the protagonist says that they are probably slaves who were freed because of the dark figure in the City of Freedom. Mary questions why they left the city, stating that it's very dangerous. Yi suggests that maybe after the dark figure stopped the slave traders, they had nowhere else to go. Ahai comments that this is the nightmare of a slave trader and says he can't even imagine how many people have died at the hands of that dark figure, and he probably wouldn't get anywhere near them either. Mary then mentions that although the teachings of the church forbid the slave trade, the actions of that dark figure are also radical. Furious, Yi says that she was wanting to punch those slave traders for a long time. Then the protagonist asks if they think the actions of the dark figure are right or wrong. The women are silent, but Ahai responds that of course, it's right. He asks them to think about it. Compared to a long-lasting misery, the sacrifices are just temporary. They may have lost their chains, but they gain a future. A pretty good trade-off. Taking Ahai's response into account, Yi agrees. She says that those shadows did something she should have done a long time ago. Then Mary states that, unfortunately, the dark figure didn't save the slaves who had already been sold. She prays for the goddess of light to save those people from their suffering. The protagonist then asks Mary what the point of her prayer is. Confused, Mary asks what the protagonist said. He then says that the goddess of light can't save those people. Furious, Mary retorts that the goddess of light is a benevolent deity, and sooner or later she will save the world from all its misery. Calmly, the protagonist responds again that she can't save them, leaving Mary even angrier. Then Yi tells the protagonist that priests are very devoted to their beliefs and asks him not to mind them. She tells Mary that the protagonist is just joking and asks her not to take it seriously. The protagonist knows he's not joking and also knows that the goddess of light can't even save herself. Ahai tells the protagonist that putting it like that is a bit too much. Then the protagonist asks him if Ahai believes in the salvation of God. Laughing, Ahai says that instead of believing in that kind of thing, he prefers to learn more spells to protect himself. Ayi agrees that it's better to do things yourself than rely on help. She says they can't waste time thinking that the gods will save them. They have to fight to find a way out with their own hands. They'll have to work even harder. The protagonist agrees and says that the Eastern continent deserves recognition for this kind of thinking. Still furious, Mary demands that the protagonist explain how some remote countries on the Eastern continent are using live sacrifices to create rain. Curious, the protagonist asks if that's true. He claims that Ahai is a Taoist, right? And questions if Taoists don't make spells to create rain. Ahai says that the young protagonist is joking. He states that even a 5th grade master can't create rain, let alone for an entire country. The protagonist then says that they should just let a 3rd grade Taoist draw a flying ice talisman, and once the ice reaches the clouds, it will rain. He then asks Ahai not to say that the country can't even find a 3rd grade Taoist. Surprised, Ahai asks the protagonist how it will rain once the ice reaches the clouds. Laughing, Ayi says that the young protagonist's sense of humor is so surreal. Mary also remarks that the protagonist is truly a comedian. Furious and still invisible, King Tian demands to know how they dare laugh at her master. She threatens to annihilate all of them. Quickly, the protagonist places his hand on her chest and asks Sting to calm down. He then questions why she would fight with children who don't even know basic physics. King is taken aback by where the protagonist places his hand, and she becomes strangely quiet all of a sudden. The protagonist notices that Xing Tian has melted before him, clearly smitten by him. She's clearly smitten. Realizing his mistake, a protagonist opens the system interface and makes a mental note to avoid any nighttime attacks from King Tian. That night, after they stop to rest, Ahai starts a campfire with his abilities. He clarifies to everyone that traveling at night is very dangerous, so he will ask the young protagonist to stay there that night. He says that he, Mary, and Ayi will take turns keeping watch so that the protagonist can rest. The protagonist responds that there are 3 3rd-grade magical beasts nearby and a lot more low-level ones, so killing them is easy. King Tian then tells the protagonist there is a group of undead in the southwest that could pass by, and she asks what she should do. The protagonist tells her not to do anything and to just stay there while he goes to sleep. King wishes the protagonist good night, thinking about attacking him, but is reminded that nighttime attacks are prohibited and doing so is at her own risk. King Tian is completely shocked by this revelation. A normal reaction, of course. While lying down, the protagonist overhears a conversation between Ayi and Ahai. Ayi tells Hai that she's pregnant. She says that once the mission is over, they'll go back home and tell their parents. Hai asks if this is true, and Ayi says it is. Hai then expresses that it's a good idea, and that after this mission, they'll return home and get married. Listening to that conversation, the protagonist thinks that those people have no discretion whatsoever. But then, something strange happens. Hai shouts for everyone to get up and says that there's a situation outside. Alarmed, Ayi realizes it's a legion of the undead. After they get up, the system asks the protagonist why this world doesn't have basic functions like reincarnation cycles. The protagonist responds that the number of undead is too high. The system agrees and says it's broken. The protagonist asks if it's really possible for it to be broken. He questions if the system means that reincarnation is interrupted and demands an explanation. Things are definitely getting more complicated. The system explains that at the beginning of the first cycle, the former Tao Celestial used his own power to evolve reincarnation to balance yin and yang. However, at the end of the first grand cycle, reincarnation was destroyed by the hands of a celestial reversal powerhouse ranked as King, the Ghost Emperor, and another reversal celestial powerhouse ranked as King Yuan Xuan. The protagonist asks if they were so powerful, why didn't they pierce the heavens? The system explains that in fact they did pierce the heavens. The world wall of the first grand cycle was pierced once, but then a surge of chaotic energy flowed into the main continent, causing many casualties. The protagonist says that now he understands a little about the ancient Tao Celestial. He concludes that strength alone doesn't solve problems, it only eliminates your enemies. At that moment, one of the undead says it has found a human, causing Ayi to tremble with fear. Also trembling with fear, Mary apologizes to the protagonists, saying that they might all die here. Ahai then informs the protagonist that there's a 3rd-grade Necromancer, a 3rd-grade Death Knight, and countless undead soldiers nearby. He tells the protagonist that unless he's stronger than them, everyone will die today. Terrified, Mary falls to her knees and cries out, saying that the gods will definitely save them. She repeats several times that she isn't faithful enough. If she insists any more, she might be labeled a heretic at this rate. Finding it all a nuisance, the protagonist says that he really doesn't like it when someone is kneeling. Breaking into a cold sweat, he high calls out to the protagonist, but he is quickly interrupted as the protagonist yells at those undead, asking if they seem to have any intelligence. Receiving no response, he then asks if they truly wish to fight him while exuding a blue aura around himself. As he radiates his aura, those monsters eagerly prepare to lunge at him. The protagonist remarks that these mindless creatures act purely on blind instinct. Then King tells him that she will help him kill them. Suddenly, one of the undead slaughters the others that were about to attack the protagonist. From atop that dead horse, the undead declares that such a powerful man should not be attacked. Surprised, the protagonist remarks that it's only expected for a dragon-like being to recognize hierarchy. Realizing the danger capable of wiping out his entire group, that undead didn't hesitate to kill those beneath him. Then the system corrects the protagonist, stating that they weren't really killed since they were already dead. The protagonist replies that he knows and claims that he will rebuild the cycle of reincarnation as soon as possible. The undead agrees and says that the weak must be eliminated. Immediately, that group of undead charges toward Ahai and Ayi. As they defend themselves as best as they can, the protagonist asserts that he hired them to talk to him. He then states that until they complete their mission, that undead has no right to lay a finger on them. Not that a corpse has many rights anyway, but oh well. With a single stomp on the ground, the protagonist unleashes enough force to nearly shatter the entire mountain. Those monsters cry out in disbelief at such unimaginable strength. As they lie on the ground, Mary and Ayi wonder just how strong the protagonist truly is. The system then questions him, reminding him that he said he wouldn't use force to deal with others. The protagonist replies that while strength can't solve problems, it can certainly solve enemies. Then he calls out to the undead leader, asking him to stop hiding and confirming whether he is the one in charge. With his true identity exposed, Ymir reveals himself as a member of the Necromancer church and immediately offers his most sincere apologies for the disturbance, pleading for the protagonist's forgiveness. The protagonist responds that it wasn't anything too serious and notes that Ymir is quite polite, causing King to glare at him jealously. Yet another one of her episodes. The protagonist states that he is not an unreasonable person. After all, this is a lawless land, so anyone is free to come and go as they please. He then releases Ymir, advising him to be more careful in the future and warning that not everyone is as moderate as he is. Grateful for the protagonist's understanding, Ymir orders his undead army to clear the way. Stunned, Ahai says he never imagined that one day a third-rank undead knight and a necromancer would be kneeling before him. Aye remarks that it feels like they are dreaming. Looking at the protagonist, Ahai wonders just how powerful he truly is. Trying not to speak up, Mary ends up telling the protagonist that he can't just leave things as they are. She argues that these are undead, and if he lets them go, more people will be killed by their hands. The protagonist turns to her and asks what she thinks he should do. Mary insists that since he is stronger than them, he should eliminate them all right there. She then steps forward, urging him to destroy those evil beings. That is what will uphold justice and light throughout the world. And he, the protagonist, will become a heroic savior. Soon, the protagonist removes Mary's hand from his chest and questions her, asking if she means that just because he is stronger than that army, he must eliminate them. He then asks if she is truly devoted to the goddess of light, leaving Mary stammering. The protagonist then states that, in the eyes of the primordial goddess of light, the undead are merely nocturnal creatures that despise sunlight. Even though they have followed a different path, they are definitely not evil. Everything in that world should be treated equally, regardless of belief or race, a rather radical thought. He then asks if Mary doesn't feel bad about destroying others just because they think and believe differently, just because she is strong. Ayi soon asks the protagonist if he knows the primordial goddess of light. He then questions if she is trying to make a joke, asking how he could possibly know her. Trying to cover up her slip, Ayi says that she probably just overthought things. But deep down, she knows that the primordial goddess of light doesn't even have the necessary qualifications to ascend the ancient road to heaven. So how could Yi have ever met her? Either way, Ahai thanks the young protagonist for saving them. Ayi points out that the protagonist has been protecting them all along, so they should give him something in return. She then offers back the pouch of coins he had given her earlier. The protagonist replies that the money does not need to be returned to him and says that it was great talking with them. Thanks to that, he gained a different perspective on certain matters, something quite interesting to have. The protagonist then accesses the system, crosses out what he had written about King Tian, and selects religious beliefs instead. He then states that he has some things to take care of now, so they must part ways. Almost forgetting, he reminds everyone that the gods are real. However, in his eyes, gods are merely people who are stronger than usual. And if they strive to reach that level and surpass it, it will become the gods in the eyes of the world. He then assures them that he will see them again in a few hours. Ayi asks if the young protagonist is a god. Ahai says that perhaps he is. Mary claims that he is above the goddess of light. As they fly, Qing Tian admits that she still doesn't understand. She asks the protagonist why they should save those insolent mortals. He explains that it is to undo the chaos and revive the heavenly path. Mortals are the most important contributors, and although the changes may be small, the accumulation of these small changes will eventually flow like a great river. He says it is about putting people first and asks if she understands. King Tian says she does and then asks where they are going now. With a snap of his fingers, the protagonist declares that they are heading to hell. Hey everyone, are you enjoying it so far? Make sure to hit that like button to support the channel and drop a comment with your thoughts. If there's a story you'd like to see here, comment the title. I'm always checking and bring you the best ones. Upon arriving in hell, the protagonist, after seeing how terrible everything is, remarks that the welcome is truly unique to hell. The system explains that this is hell, one of the three great realms, the place of death and reincarnation. The protagonist asks if that's really all there is. He claims that all he sees is a pile of ruins and some undead trash. King Tian states that the presence of such filth is simply polluting the protagonist's eyes and offers to wipe them out immediately. The protagonist tells her to calm down, explaining that those undead are just low-level, mindless creatures. Getting bothered by them is just being petty. King then agrees, saying that the protagonist is right. Curious, the system asks the protagonist why he has no prejudice against the undead. This system sometimes creeps me out. The protagonist quickly responds that the existence of the undead also follows the heavenly Tao, so how are they any different from any other race? He explains that the only issue is that the cycle of reincarnation is broken, which is why they have all become mindless walking corpses. Soon, the broken state of the reincarnation cycle is displayed before them. King Tian asks the protagonist what they should do next, and he questions if that's even something to ask. Walking toward the cycle, he declares that they are going to rebuild the cycle of reincarnation. Immediately, the system interrupts him, warning that although he is capable of reconstructing the cycle, it will require a tremendous amount of his power, leaving him weakened during the process. The protagonist asks exactly how weak he will become. The system explains that he would likely be able to withstand a single attack from a high-level celestial being, but a second strike would injure him. The protagonist then asks the system if it really considers that to be weak. He questions if the system has a misunderstanding of the term weak. The system clarifies that, essentially, he cannot be disturbed during the reincarnation process, otherwise he will fail. The protagonist acknowledges that this is indeed a problem, and what a problem it is. Without hesitation, he looks at King Tian, walks up to her, and takes her hand. Pulling her close by the waist, he declares that only she can help him in that moment. Confused about why only she can assist him, the protagonist begins drawing some of her power and invites her to recreate the cycle of reincarnation together. King Tian gazes at him with admiration. Placing his hand over the cycle, the protagonist proclaims, "Let the restoration begin." As light floods all of hell, the undead begin to sense the energy. One of them wonders where his head is. After finding it, he mutters that something feels off and questions whether it is already time for reincarnation. Looking at the radiant light illuminating the entire realm, another undead recognizes it as the light of reincarnation and exclaims that the heavenly Tao is repairing the cycle. He questions how such a thing is even possible. He recalls that, in the past, Yuang Swan of the ancient wild city, and he had competed for control over reincarnation. In the end, each of them obtained half of the power, but the cycle was damaged during the battle. Since then, the first and second great cycles have remained in their current broken state. He also knows that hell was blatantly ignored in the past, and he wonders why the cycle is now trying to restore reincarnation. Observing the protagonist and King Tian, he ponders why the appearance of the heavenly Tao has changed. He recalls that previously, it manifested as both a male and a female. He questions what it is scheming this time, probably something unusual, to say the least. Then that ghostly undead states that regardless of the protagonist's intentions, since he dared to expose his weaknesses, he won't hold back against him. Meanwhile, a zombie standing behind the undead looks at his own reflection and questions who he is. Another undead recalls that he was protecting a princess and wonders why he is here and where this place is. Yet another zombie is in disbelief that he has become a skeleton, while a female undead desperately asks where her son is. That undead entity realizes that restoring the memories and intelligence of these undead requires an absolutely terrifying level of power from the heavenly Tao. Acting recklessly now would likely lead to destruction. However, waiting for those beings to revive would probably increase the chances of success for the plan. Moreover, reestablishing reincarnation doesn't just benefit the undead. Soon, that Empress abandons her initial plan and decides to spare the protagonist for now. Lying atop the piles of bodies, she acknowledges that there are still several powerhouses in hell and concludes that this is going to be quite an entertaining show to watch. While restarting the cycle, some monsters prepare to attack the protagonist and Xing. She then says that it looks like some flies are approaching. The protagonist tells Xing not to get distracted because he has his plans. With a snap of his fingers, the protagonist creates a shadow of himself and says that the remaining protection work should be left to that shadow. King Tian questions the protagonist, saying that if he wants to stop those insatiable creatures, he should leave it to her. She then asks why he created that clone. The protagonist responds to King Tian, saying that naturally he has his reasons, but he knows that if he left the protection to King, he thinks that hell would be destroyed before he could even finish restoring the cycle, and that would ruin everything. That shadow tells the monsters they have two options: one, go back where they came from, or keep approaching and be killed by her. The monsters respond to that shadow, saying that his bravery is excessive, and that they would like to see how strong he is. They say that everyone knows the rules of hell, strength and law. One of them says that the ancient beast Xuan Huang is slower than them this time, so the chances are higher. As they try to attack that shadow, she says they really are just a bunch of greedy guys. And it's no wonder that the first and second heavenly Daos chose to destroy the world. She says that it doesn't hurt to play with them. Missing all their attacks on the shadow, she mocks them, asking if that's all the powerful beings of hell can do. And she says she hasn't even warmed up yet. Plenty of sarcasm here. That shadow notices that there is a type of mage behind her who activates 100 times gravity. His name is Oz, and he has the power of the first stage celestial layer, the legendary mage who died protecting his kingdom during the second great cycle. He'd relied on his magical powers to restore his consciousness. He was in the mid-stage celestial layer when he was still alive. Sensing that magic, the protagonist's shadow asks if that is gravitational magic. He says it's interesting, but unfortunately, this type of magic cannot stop him. The Slayer says that stopping that shadow for just 1 second is enough. With mid-stage celestial layer power, he was a famous assassin of the rat race during the first great cycle, possessing extreme speed and unparalleled assassination skills. He was previously killed while trying to assassinate an elf god. He was at the final stage of the celestial layer when he was alive. Then that rat says that now is his chance and tries to attack the protagonist directly. King Tian tells the protagonist that someone is trying to attack them from behind. He asks King not to get distracted and not to underestimate his clone. Quickly, the protagonist's clone stops that rat and defeats him with just one blow. Soon, the clone says he will play with them a little, but he warns them not to go too far. One of those monsters says the clone is just one guy, and that they can use this opportunity to attack him together. Then they all charge at the protagonist for a combined attack. Finding those monsters annoying, that clone says he will show them the absolute difference in strength. With one move, the clone commands everyone to kneel before him, making those monsters fall before the clone, claiming that they can't move. The pressure was intense. Watching from afar, a half-snake woman says that just the aura of that clone was enough to suppress several powerful specialists. Another woman asks what kind of terrifying strength that is. Further back, arriving with laughter, the skeleton knight Wanghai claims that it has been a long time since someone this interesting has come to hell, and he says he would like to see how strong he really is. One of the monsters, upon spotting Wanghai, says that it is said that in his previous life, Wanghai was the most powerful dragon rider of the East during the First Era. After his death, he did not dissipate and ended up becoming a skeletal knight. He adds that Wanghai's current strength is at least at the final stage of the celestial layer, making him one of the strongest in hell. Wanghai declares that the celestial treasure will be his, and those who wish to stand in his way must die. Calmly, the protagonist's clone states that Wanghai will not get what he desires. Using absolute strength, the knight absorbs all the power from the monsters who were kneeling before the clone, creating a massive sphere of energy around him. The other monsters exclaim in shock that a mere skeleton possesses such terrifying power, questioning just how strong he must have been when he was still alive. He must have been on another level. After channeling all that energy, Wanghai unleashes his attack from 8 directions against the protagonist's clone. However, the clone effortlessly dodges and lands a direct punch on Wanghai's face, unleashing an overwhelming force that annihilates Wanghai instantly. Stunned by such power, the monsters question whether that was simply too strong. Looking at the 3 who remained and had no intention of fleeing, the protagonist's clone faces Daisy, founder of the Necromancy sect from the Third Era, Celestial Layer, initial stage, the undead sect of the Second Era's ancient ancestor, Yulao, Celestial Layer, intermediate stage, and the Eastern Totem, Hawa, Celestial Layer, intermediate stage. The clone swiftly teleports behind them and asks if they intend to fight him. Gulao immediately responds that he would never dare and clarifies that they only wish to know the clone's name and the purpose of his arrival in hell. The clone bluntly replies that there is no need for them to ask. Soon, they will know the reason. Here he was precise and to the point. Daisy, Gulao, and Hawa are suddenly taken aback by an enormous light emerging from the center of the cycle. As they look to the sky and see the dark, shadowy smoke dissipating, replaced by a new light, Daisy remarks on how mysterious it is. She claims that this is a law she could never comprehend in her entire life. Gulao states that the spirits are returning to the afterlife. The understanding this person has of the laws of life and death exceeds theirs. Hawa then says that he is not creating a new law. This is the true law of life and death itself. Daisy realizes that this is the reconstruction of the reincarnation cycle, and for someone to possess such immense power, she is abruptly interrupted by Gulao and Hawa, who are visibly shaken upon hearing the word reincarnation. The clone cuts them off, telling them that there is no need to keep guessing. They will soon learn the truth. As the light in that place grows increasingly brighter, the monsters begin to return to their human forms. Their blood and flesh reappear. At that moment, the protagonist tells King that it is finally complete. She congratulates him on his accomplishment. He then states that hell will now finally function as it should. The Ghost Empress, with her reformed body, realizes that this man is truly the heavenly Tao. She acknowledges that she must thank him for restoring the souls of all beings in hell with such ease. Here, he has begun to gain some recognition. Daisy notices that the souls of the undead are being restored. Gulao comments that normally, when a soul disperses, not even the strongest specialists can bring it back. Hawa adds that unless it is the heavenly Tao. At that moment, the protagonist appears before them, accompanied by King Tian. Trembling with fear, Hawa asks if the protagonist is truly the heavenly Tao. Furious, King Tian snaps at Hawa, exclaiming that she dares to doubt the identity of the Lord Heavenly Tao, calling her damned. The protagonist quickly intervenes, stopping King and asking her not to be so impulsive all the time. Soon the protagonist responds, saying that as they can see, he truly is the heavenly Tao. This shocks Daisy, Gulao, and Hawa. Hawa says that she still remembers the catastrophe of the second great cycle, and that she never wants to experience that feeling of despair again. The protagonist swiftly moves toward her and states that there is something he wishes to ask. Fearful, Hawa pleads for him to ask his question. He mentions that he has noticed that many powerful specialists avoided the two great battles and asks if she can explain how that happened. Hawa replies with a phrase that confuses the protagonist, the inner world. She quickly elaborates, explaining that as long as there are sufficient resources in the inner world, they can survive the beastly power outside, which isn't entirely wrong. The protagonist then asks if they had the strength to unite and resist the power of the heavenly Tao. Daisy explains that although the second great cycle was weaker, there were still at least a few hundred celestial layer specialists. Gulao adds that they worked together to resist the power of the heavenly Tao, but in the end, only a dozen people survived. Curious, Hawa asks the protagonist why he caused that catastrophe. At that moment, he asks the system, if I told them that I was forced to become the heavenly Tao, do you think they would believe me? The system replies that they would not be able to understand the fact that the heavenly Tao can be replaced. Knowing that he has to rely on a different explanation, the protagonist states that for those who have already reached the pinnacle of existence in their realm, it is inevitable that they will come into contact with the reconstruction of law. He explains that the power of law is not something everyone can control, and no one wants to see others wielding such power. Therefore, conflicts inevitably arise. The opportunities given by the heavenly Tao are meant to be equally distributed among all beings, but as time passes, they are gradually monopolized by a small number of specialists. He asks them to take Hell's reincarnation cycle as an example. Due to the conflicts between Ye Yuangzuan of the ancient wild city and the Ghost Emperor of the second great cycle, the cycle was split in half and taken away. They completely destroyed the order. Since then, reincarnation has ceased, leading to the tragic state of Hell. Thus, destroying the world would allow more people to live. Otherwise, with the greed of these specialists, the world would have already been completely destroyed during the first great cycle. Daisy admits that in the past, they were so focused on increasing their power that they ignored everything else. Gulao acknowledges that this may indeed be karmic retribution. What goes around comes around. The protagonist states that even the strongest can make mistakes. What matters is how they compensate for them. Gulao, confused, asks, "What do you mean by compensation?" The protagonist declares that he is giving them a chance. He asks if they wish to join the organization of the Heavenly Tao. King Tian immediately objects, saying that these people are far too weak to be worthy of standing beside him. However, the protagonist counters by stating that the cooperation of all beings is necessary to maintain the order of the heavenly Tao. While these individuals may be weak compared to him, within the three realms they are already at the peak of existence. This leaves King completely speechless. As expected, the protagonist then reveals that the reincarnation cycle is not yet complete. He explains that the cycle has a natural mechanism for absorbing souls. Weak souls are directly absorbed. However, for those above the rank of Heavenly King, the cycle does not have much influence over them. In such cases, specialists like them will be needed. Their job? To force souls to reincarnate. He names this profession Ghost Hunters. He then announces that he has already decided on the name of their organization, Hades. He asks them what they think and whether they are willing to join Hades. King Tian comments that the name chosen by the protagonist is truly special. Looking at King Tian, the others witness the absolute power that she possesses. Without hesitation, Gulao and Daisy both say they are willing to join. The protagonist, as he believes cultivators can be motivated in various ways. Hanwha steps in and says that while she is willing to serve, she has a few conditions. Enraged, King Tian snaps back, saying that a mere being like her dares to make demands. But calming her down, the protagonist explains that only through mutual benefit can a cooperation be truly lasting. A universal truth. The protagonist then asks Hanwha if she wants him to heal her injuries, right? She nods and reveals her wounds. She claims the injury was caused by the primordial demon wolf, and that to heal it, she needs the sap of the tree of life from the Elven forest. The protagonist is surprised to hear about the Elven forest and remarks that he definitely must visit it in the future. Without hesitation, he agrees to Hanwha's request, and she immediately bows, thanking her master. The protagonist then says things are going well, but Hades still needs a manager. King Tian chimes in, saying she has a recommendation for the managerial role. Yuming Tian is without question the best candidate to manage Hades. Turning to the system, the protagonist searches for Yuming Tian. In an instant, he accesses all her information. Her power is listed as final stage of the heaven-defying layer, and her description says she's a celestial incarnation created from the corpse of a being, the first Sky Realm specialist in the world, who was killed by the Frost Demon Emperor. The protagonist then asks the system if she can be revived. The system confirms and explains that a part of Tian's essence lies in the protagonist's blood and that the other celestial incarnations can be revived in the same way. Without any doubt, the protagonist says they need to go revive her immediately, leaving Hell and all the new members of Hades behind. On the way, King Tian turns to the protagonist with a question. She asks why, if he can easily heal Hanwha's wounds, does he insist on personally going to the Elven forest? The protagonist replies that she wouldn't understand and says it's like accepting quests from an NPC, leaving King Tian completely confused. Upon arriving at Yuming Tian's resting place, the protagonist says that everything is fine for now, trying to reassure her. As he approaches Yuming, he touches her face and notices that her body is still intact. He says that even though she was sealed here after death, her aura is no less than King Tian's. The system adds that among the 5 celestial incarnations, King Tian is the weakest. The protagonist responds, saying he's glad King Tian can't hear what the system is saying, while King Tian looks at him confused, wondering why he's talking to himself. Then he says it's time to stop wasting time and bring Yuming Tian back to life. Suddenly, the system issues a gentle reminder. Reviving a celestial incarnation requires the transfer of a portion of the heavenly Tao's origin power in the protagonist's body. This power will be given permanently and cannot be recovered. The system asks, "Are you sure you want to revive Yuming Tian?" The protagonist analyzes the risk. Giving power permanently means that if she dies again, that power will be lost forever. He acknowledges that this choice requires caution. Ultimately, he decides to grant her 1% of his power. Taking a small grain of power from his own head, the protagonist nearly causes a catastrophe with just that tiny fragment. His power is absolutely absurd at this point. So powerful is the release that Hanwha, Daisy, and Gulao sense his aura from miles away. Daisy asks aloud, who is this Lord Heavenly Tao releasing such intense pressure, and wonders if he intends to destroy Hell. Meanwhile, the Ghost Empress, feeling that terrifying pressure, wonders what the Heavenly Tao is doing, and questions whether he has realized she is still alive. Then the protagonist quickly restrains that power. Startled, King Tian calls out to her master. He replies that he forgot to control his aura when releasing his strength. He never expected that just 1% of his power would be so terrifying. Realizing that the Celestial Tao can truly accomplish anything, he kneels and places his energy into Yuming Tian's body. She awakens immediately, embracing the protagonist and thanking him for finally reuniting with her. A true display of gratitude. King Tian quickly pulls them apart, stating that Yuming doesn't need to be so close to talk. Yuming apologizes for being rude, Mocking her, King Tien smirks and remarks that it's good that Yuming understands. Yumi kneels and thanks the protagonist for his kindness, vowing not to disappoint him this time. The protagonist assigns her a mission. Starting today, she is the chief manager of Hades. She has only one task: to build Hades and ensure the safety of the reincarnation cycle. She declares that the protagonist's orders are absolute. Annoying the protagonist, the system points out that he actually gave her 2 tasks, not 1. Frustrated, he asks if it really matters. Observing King Tien, the protagonist realizes that Yuming Tian's personality is no different from hers. The system tells him that's correct but doesn't sound convinced. The protagonist sighs, saying he'll go insane if she acts the same way as King Tien. One King Tien is already enough. Yumi asks if the protagonist won't stay in the underworld. Jealous King Tien replies that he has other matters to handle, so Yumi can take care of the underworld herself. Patting Yumi's head, the protagonist reassures her, saying she is one of his celestial incarnations, so she must have more confidence. He declares that he has already reconstructed the reincarnation cycle, only the title of King of Hades remains. Yumi nods in understanding. Without hesitation, she raises her voice, calling out to all beings in the underworld. Mercy. She declares herself as the celestial incarnation Yuming Tian. From now on, she will be the leader of Hades, assisting the celestial Tao in managing the underworld. Former craftsmen will handle design, the great undead will oversee construction, and the powerful undead will enter the human realm as ghosts to guide lost souls. She warns that those who refuse to comply will be enemies of the celestial Tao. Seeing Yuming's authoritative orders, the protagonist admits she is truly terrifying. The system chimes in, stating that she was once the leader of the Yuming clan while she was alive. The protagonist concludes that nothing will go wrong if Hades is left in her hands. King Tien then asks where they will go next. The protagonist responds they are heading to the Elven forest. In the Elven forest, as they transport several captured elves, one of the men remarks that these elves are of exceptionally high quality. Another agrees, saying that once they sell them all, they will make a fortune. Their leader, the third-rank Earth Dragon Knight Sabi, warns them not to be careless until they are out of the forest. He orders them to stay alert, and woe to anyone who doesn't. One of his subordinates scoffs, calling him overly cautious. He questions who would dare block their path. Immediately, they come face to face with a clone of the celestial Tao standing before them. The bandits demand to know who he is and how he dares to stand in their way. They scoff, assuming he must not have heard of the Earth Dragon bandits. Pointing at the elves they are transporting, the leader accuses the clone of trying to steal their loot. He asks if this isn't going too far. The clone silently raises a spear, causing his enemies to burst into laughter at the sight. They mock him for standing on foot without a mount. But in an instant, the clone summons a divine dragon of the 5th rank. Everyone is left utterly bewildered. Looking out from inside the cage, the elves exclaim that they have been saved. They claim that the great elven god must have heard their prayers and sent a messenger to rescue them. However, one elf in the back hesitates. She thinks this cannot be. If it were truly the great elven god, his exclusive elven angel would be present, but that dark figure. Terrified, the leader declares that he doesn't care where that clone came from. If he wants slaves, they can give him some. The clone waves his finger in refusal and states that he wants all of them. Furious, the leader asks if the clone is joking and if he realizes how dangerous it was to capture those elves. He questions who cares if the clone is a knight of a 5th-rank divine dragon. Furthermore, he points out that his Earth Dragon isn't suffering from bloodline suppression, which means the clone must be a fraud. There's nothing to fear. He orders his men to kill the clone immediately. Without hesitation, the clone commands his dragon to unleash a burst of blue fire, instantly incinerating a large portion of the bandits, swift and deadly. Seeing his entire gang being annihilated, the leader trembles in fear at the sheer strength and power before him. After wiping out the rest of the bandits, the clone moves toward the leader, who desperately pleads for him to stay away. With a few swift cuts, the clone slices through the carriage carrying the elves, freeing them all. As one of the elves expresses her gratitude for being rescued, the leader seizes the moment to launch a sneak attack from behind. He mocks the clone for daring to turn his back on him. An elf warns the clone to be careful. Without even turning around, the clone hurls his spear, piercing through the Earth Dragon's head and impaling the leader's chest in a single, effortless strike. One light blow, just like that. Watching their leader fall, the remaining bandits panic and flee. However, as they run, they come face to face with the 3rd Brigade of the Divine Tree Shepherd Legion, who swiftly execute them for attempting to escape. The Legion announces that they are there to rescue the captured elves. One of the Legion members points at the clone and declares that he is the Divine Dragon Knight who saved their brethren. He adds that the bandits were entirely defeated by him. However, one of the elves grabs a captured bandit and states that they will sell all of them to the nobles later. Upon hearing this, the protagonist's clone shifts into the form of a Legion member and kills the elf who suggested selling the prisoners. Immediately, the Elven commander orders her entire legion to prepare for battle. Before the fight can begin, one of the formerly imprisoned elves steps forward, positioning herself between the clone and the legion. She pleads for them to stop and not to fight. She insists that the clone has done nothing wrong. She explains that she can sense he treats all life forms fairly. The legion commander narrows her eyes and asks what she means by fairness. While finishing the task of freeing the remaining imprisoned elves, the rescued elf clarifies, since the Shadow's appearance, he has followed only one rule: to attack those who traffic other beings, whether they be bandits or warriors. She assures the commander that as long as she avoids involvement in the slave trade, he will not attack. The commander immediately calls for everyone's attention and declares that no one is allowed to take prisoners, putting an end to that nonsense. Without another word, the Shadow vanishes. One of the elves thanks the nameless stranger once more for saving her life. Meanwhile, the protagonist sneezes, noticing the commotion. King Tian asks if he is okay. He replies that he's fine, he just felt an itch in his nose. Noticing something below, King Tian comments that it looks like something is happening down there. The protagonist simply states that it is the law he created earlier taking effect. The ghost hunters spring into action, gathering the souls of those who perish in battle. As the souls are collected, the ghost hunters sternly warn them to behave and not to move around too much. They inform them that they are being taken to the underworld. That elf wonders who those beings are, but before she can dwell on it, the leader interrupts her, asking what she is waiting for. She orders them to return to Kale with them. Still questioning what she saw, the elf wonders if she is the only one who can see those entities. The protagonist observes that the underworld and the cycle of reincarnation seem to be functioning smoothly. King Tian remarks that everything is the result of the protagonist's actions. He tells her not to exaggerate and reminds her of their purpose for visiting that place. Their next destination is the Elven capital, Kale, the City of Life. In Kale, an elf informs the rescued slaves that from now on, they will be responsible for cleaning the city, stating that the Elven race does not tolerate laziness. He hands a broom to the elf who had witnessed those strange beings earlier. Realizing that she is finally back home, she is suddenly surprised as a carriage pulls up next to her. As the protagonist steps out, he sees elves everywhere. He tells King Tian to disguise her ears so they can blend in better. Nearby, an older nobleman asks what appears to be a waitress how many minerals the inferior races have excavated today. She replies that it's the same amount as usual. As they continue walking, a beggar elf on the street pleads for help from anyone who can spare anything. Seeing this, the protagonist admits that he has nothing against nobles, but the stark disparity between rich and poor is depressing. The system reminds him that he is the Tao Celestial. He could wipe out all the nobles in an instant if he wanted to. Telling the system to stop spouting nonsense, he explains that for true equality, the oppressed must resist on their own. External intervention will only turn them into victims of a new oppressor. The system remarks that the protagonist is becoming more and more like a true Tao Celestial. Taking it as a compliment, the protagonist changes the topic, noting that the state of the world tree looks excellent. He asks if this has anything to do with the Elven goddess. The system confirms it. King Tian then asks if the protagonist wants to meet the Elven goddess. He says yes. Immediately, she declares that she will burn down the world tree, guaranteeing that the goddess will come out. Telling her to calm down, the protagonist explains that he just wants to talk, not fight. King Tian protests, saying that the goddess was a rebel during the second cycle. There's no point in talking to her. That only convinces the protagonist even more. If she was a rebel, then it is even more important to speak with her. He needs to understand what the rebels are thinking. He reminds King Tian that the more friends they have, the fewer enemies they will face. He insists they must gather as many allies as possible and asks if she understands. Listening to everything he just said, King Tian starts to believe that the protagonist is a true sage. Suddenly, Princess Yixia of the Elves comes barreling through with an out-of-control carriage, yelling for everyone to get out of the way. She won't take responsibility if anyone dies. Staying the carriage speeding straight toward him, the protagonist simply lets it phase through his body as if it were nothing, using the system. The system identifies the reckless driver as the Golden Elf Princess Yixia, currently at the mid-stage of the Third Order. The protagonist sighs and questions if this is how nobles educate their children. He wonders if he also has to correct their behavior. He mutters that it's a good thing he has a calm temperament. If he were someone else, he would have thrown her to the ground, slapped her a few times, and tossed her into a group of black orcs. Noticing that an elderly man won't be able to move out of the way in time, the elf from before quickly flies to his aid, saving him from being trampled by the princess's runaway carriage. Furious, the princess yells at the vagabonds to watch where they walk. The elf checks on the old man, asking if he is all right. Grateful, he reassures her that he is fine and prays for the protection of the elven mother goddess. Hearing the name of the goddess makes the elf pause, deep in thought. Soon the protagonist applauds the elf and says it wasn't bad at all. He remarks that she possesses a rare kindness in that feudal society. The elf then asks who he is. Quickly, he replies that he is just a curious observer, nothing more. The protagonist then turns to the elderly man who was saved and asks if the elven princess has always been that rude. The old man replies that it's not just the princess. All nobles behave the same way. He explains that the fate of elves is determined from birth. Golden elves and moon elves are nobility, sea elves and forest elves are artisans, while gray and black elves like himself are destined to be slaves. A sad reality. The elf protests, saying that this isn't how things should be. She insists that the status of the elven people should never be determined by birth and asks why the old man believes otherwise. He explains that it's because of lifespan. Gray elves only live for about 1,000 years, while golden elves can live for over 5,000. He claims that the gods have already written their destinies and they have no choice but to obey. The protagonist comments on how long elves live. The system confirms this but explains that the cost of longevity is a low fertility rate, which is also a rule of the heavens. The stronger a being is, the less likely they are to have children. The protagonist says he understands now and wonders if that means he can have a baby. The system responds that it depends. Does he want to have a baby himself or make others have babies? Upon hearing this conversation, King Tian is overjoyed. She wonders if the protagonist finally wants a child and eagerly declares that she's fine with it. Without hesitation, she pounces on the protagonist and asks how many children he wants. He quickly tells King Tian to calm down, stopping her advance. Seeing the commotion, the elderly man chuckles, remarking that young people sure are full of energy. Once again, he thanks the elf for saving him and says he should continue on his way, returning to his original path. Upset, the elf repeats that elves shouldn't live like this. The protagonist then tells her that today's elves are very different from the ones she once ruled over. He then asks Lucia if he is right, or rather, the former elven mother goddess. Suddenly, she releases a bright green aura and demands to know who the protagonist is. He responds by asking if a rebel against the heavens like her truly does not recognize the heavenly Tao. She says that's impossible. She has seen the heavenly Tao before, and he is completely different from the protagonist. Realizing he needs to prove his point differently, the protagonist snaps his fingers, creating a dome that blocks all of the elf's power. He then grabs her face gently and asks if she believes him now. She wonders how the protagonist moved so fast and when he managed to get so close to her. Pushing his hand away from her face, she knows she must make the first move in battle. Just as she prepares to strike, King Tian intercepts her attack with a swift kick, demanding to know how she dares to be rude to her master. King Tian declares that the elf is courting death. Seeing that she is being confronted, the elf realizes that her soul has only just begun recovering, and her current strength barely reaches the peak of the 6th layer. She knows she must flee. Summoning her staff, she uses spatial teleportation and vanishes in an instant, gone in the blink of an eye. The protagonist comments that it's a 5th-rank elven magic spell, noting that such a thing is quite rare in that world. Unfortunately for her, however, she's facing the heavenly Tao. Just then, the elf slams right into the dome the protagonist had summoned earlier, crashing back to the ground. Injured, the elf cannot believe that even teleportation doesn't work against that barrier. King Tian swiftly immobilizes her. The protagonist then tells King Tian to let the elf go, saying it's enough. King Tian protests, reminding the protagonist that she is the elven mother goddess, a rebel who defies the heavens. Repeating himself, the protagonist firmly says he told her to let her go. After releasing her, the protagonist asks the elf if she now believes whether or not he is the heavenly Tao. He also tells her not to be nervous, as he only wants to ask her a few questions. Knowing that in this situation, even Dongfeng Hoshin wouldn't be able to escape, the only thing she can do now is cooperate. Resigned, she asks the protagonist what he wants to know. The protagonist then asks his first question. What is the rebels' plan? The elf says she has no idea. Even though she is indeed a member of the rebels from the 2nd Great Cycle, she doesn't know if there is any kind of plan against the heavens in this 3rd calendar. And even if there was one, Dongfeng Hoshin and the others would never tell her. Secrets must be kept. Furious, Xing Tan jumps onto the elf's head and accuses her of lying, saying that she simply doesn't want to tell the truth. She then tells the protagonist that she will beat the elf up. But before she can act, the protagonist stops her and asks the elf to be honest with him. The elf then explains that an elven god is only considered a mid-level force among the rebels, so it's natural that she wouldn't have access to information about any specific plan. For his second question, the protagonist asks why she hates the heavens. She explains that in the first great cycle, she was a goddess born from the world tree. Together with the world tree, she protected the birth and growth of the elves. Those prosperous and joyful times are still fresh in her memories. But at the end of the first cycle, she witnessed a terrible catastrophe with her own eyes. She barely managed to survive while the world tree was reduced to a mere seed. And now the protagonist dares to ask why she hates the heavens. She questions if such a question even makes sense. Even I don't know. The protagonist then states that the former heavenly Tao's act of destroying all beings only succeeded in attracting deep hatred. The system adds that this is something the former heavenly Tao failed to consider. For his final question, the protagonist asks, deep in her heart, what does she consider to be the most important thing to her? She replies, the most important thing. She then answers that all she wants is to live and protect her people forever. The protagonist immediately questions whether she is truly willing to do that. Infuriated, the elf demands to know what he means by that. The protagonist remarks that actions speak louder than words and suggests that she see the truth with her own eyes. Without hesitation, the protagonist teleports to the Elven forest mine, bringing the elf and King Tian with him. Upon arriving, the elf asks what this place is. The protagonist explains that this is where her people refer to as a good place for generating wealth. As they look around, they see elven slaves being whipped, and they notice that an elf is the one overseeing them. The overseer shouts that if their delivery is delayed, they will be rewarded with more lashes. And so the whipping continues as the enslaved elves are ordered to stop being lazy and get moving. Seeing this, the elf is overcome with fury. How could they dare to treat their own people this way? The protagonist remarks that it seems he was only able to stop human-led trafficking, but when it comes to pure slavery, the black figure does not appear. Curious, the elf questions what kind of black figure he is referring to, and she realizes that those figures from before were something created by the heavenly Tao. She then wonders, when did this guy become so benevolent? When charity is too much, even a saint gets suspicious. She then questions the protagonist. His goal is to save the slaves. Why doesn't he simply impose a rule against pure slavery as well? The protagonist replies that it seems she has misunderstood something. He explains that the source of slavery isn't just human trafficking. Prisoners of war and criminals are also slaves. Then he asks her, does she want to save all of them too? He says that what he truly despises is human trafficking. However, the massacres, assaults, and oppression are decisions made by the leaders of each race. Lifting the elf goddess's face and raising her arm, the protagonist tells her not to throw her responsibilities onto him. Elven Mother Goddess. The goddess claims she doesn't understand. She says that the protagonist has the power to change everything. So why doesn't he want to save more people? Swiftly, the protagonist covers her mouth and asks her to think about the following. When the previous heavenly Tao tried to change everything, what did they do? He then asks her to explain why the land of the mortal realm became barren, why the heavens are the world with the greatest amount of resources, and why reincarnation was damaged. An important detail to remember. The goddess responds that they only wanted a better life. The protagonist then questions her. So in order to achieve that, they needed to seize the power of a heavenly Tao. He then points out that it seems like her people, the elven nobility, are also merely trying to achieve a better life by oppressing their own kind. The goddess strongly denies this. She insists that all of this is happening because the protagonist wants to absorb the power of all beings to make himself stronger. If they don't resist, it will all be killed by him. The protagonist denies wanting to absorb the power of all beings. He explains that the power of the heavenly Tao comes from all living things, meaning that the death of countless beings actually weakens the heavenly Tao's power. He then challenges the goddess if that were true. Why would the heavenly Tao choose to destroy all beings instead of eliminating only the most powerful ones? Confused, the goddess admits that she doesn't know anything. The protagonist says that even if she doesn't know, she is still capable of recognizing reality, isn't she? He then uses the system to show her an image. The protagonist asks if the goddess had noticed something. He reveals an image of her in skeletal form. To be more precise, this was right after she had awakened during the second cycle. He explains that the purpose of the spring aura was to resurrect the world tree and give her vitality. He then questions her. She knew that the source of life was what revived the continent, didn't she? Just confirming. Then he asks, does she know how many lives could have been born if she hadn't taken that source of life? And how many sources of life exist within her small world? Kneeling before the protagonist, the goddess confesses that she knew everything, but she wanted to live. She insists that if the protagonist hadn't destroyed all beings, she wouldn't have needed to use the source of life. The protagonist then counters, if she hadn't stolen the opportunity given to all beings by the heavens, why would the heavenly Tao have chosen to destroy her? He states that some people ruin others out of their own greed, and now she is facing the same problem that the heavenly Tao once did. Then he asks if she were face to face with the fallen elves, what kind of answer would she give them? Before she can respond, an elf interrupts, shouting that the rebel dark elves are invading. Moments later, he is slain by Chattel, the leader of the dark elf resistance. Chattel then turns to his fellow dark elves and proclaims that he is there to liberate them all. He urges them to take up their weapons. At first, the enslaved elves hesitate, but the overseer warns them to think carefully. Rebellions never end well. Furious, the black elves decide to slaughter the ones who enslaved them. Without hesitation, they charge forward and kill them all. Witnessing the scene, the goddess stands helplessly. She insists that this isn't how things should be. This wasn't supposed to happen. She claims that she must stop all of this. The protagonist then asks, what will she do after stopping it? If she doesn't resolve the root of the problem, events like this will keep happening. That's not wrong. Crying, the goddess claims that everything is happening because of the protagonist. She argues that if her power were still there, she wouldn't have let this happen. Then she summons her power to try to threaten the protagonist. Immediately, King Tan asks if that rebel still hasn't learned her lesson and tries to attack the goddess, but she is quickly stopped by the Tao Celestial, who tells her to let go at once. The protagonist says that the goddess still doesn't understand. He explains that in the second great cycle, elves were already divided into upper and lower classes. The goddess then asks the protagonist what he is talking about. He explains that in the second cycle, the golden elves close to her were already nobles, while the dark elves were exiled. They never considered dark elves to be of the same race, but rather inferior beings. And it was because the Tao Celestial saw the suffering of all beings that he chose to destroy everything. She then argues that as the Elven Mother Goddess, she never looked at her own people, a bit hypocritical on her part. Crying, the goddess admits that she is not a qualified Mother Goddess. The protagonist then tells her to stop crying and says that when faced with a problem, she must find a way to solve it. That is what the Tao Celestial does, and she must do the same. The goddess then says that she is now too weak and has no power. The protagonist places his hand on the goddess's shoulder and asks if she didn't resist when she was weak. He questions where the courage she had when she was against the heavens is gone. He states that if she shows even half of that courage, the elves will likely change their opinion. The goddess then says that now she knows what she must do. The protagonist asks what she is going to do now. She says she wants to go to the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress and ask what their demands are. The protagonist tells her that she already knows she must always listen to the voice of the people. As a reward, the protagonist offers the goddess a ride to the fortress. Opening a kind of portal on the ground, the protagonist calls the two to travel, taking a little trip. King Tyan then asks why the protagonist wants to help that rebel goddess, claiming that she is so bad. The protagonist responds by saying that having one more friend is better than one more enemy. This makes the goddess find it amusing, as she realizes that she really knows almost nothing about the Tao Celestial. The protagonist then asks the goddess why she isn't walking toward the portal. She responds that she is already following him. Arriving at the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress, the goddess first comes across a spider and says that it seems there is an old acquaintance there. The protagonist then says that he has stopped hiding the goddess's presence and claims that everyone can now see her. As they enter the cave, the Dark Elves say that an intruder is entering and order everyone to attack and kill the intruder. Seeing the arrows coming in their direction, the protagonist tells her that she, the mother goddess of the elves, wouldn't be killed by arrows from her own race, right? She replies that although she is not fully recovered, she is not that weak. The goddess then casts an arrow-deflecting spell, surprising all the Dark Elves. They quickly realize that this ability can only be used by a 5th-rank mage. Realizing they are in trouble, then one of the Dark Elves tries to charge at the goddess, declaring that no matter her origin, all golden elves must die. The goddess then casts a forest protection spell, trapping all the Dark Elves. The protagonist comments that even at the early stages of the 4th Order, the power of the Dark Elves is not low. He notes that this kind of strength is rare in human nations. That is true. Sensing the aura, the goddess says she is coming. Soon, the mysterious, beautiful girl appears and tells all the Dark Elves to stop attacking. She states that they are no match for her. After all, that elf is the mother goddess of the elves. And that was today's story. If you liked it, leave a like to show support, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you won't miss the next videos. Don't forget to comment on what you think and which story you want to see here next. I'm always reading the comments and I bring the best stories you send. See you in the next videos.